Gacchami Sangham Sharanam Gacchami Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami.
Hello and welcome wherever you may be to a very warm and strangely peaceful August on the south coast of England. I have a selection of passages from Mr. Gurdjieff today that seem to be relevant, and a lot of commentary about them and about life in general. This week I had a sudden flash of insight into the Akashic records. Gurdjieff did mention them, but I think only once. The insight was ash. The ash. Akashic. The ash. Like it was the ash of what had been done. In the same way, there was a time when Sherlock Holmes looked into the ashes of a fire, and he could just about discern the remains of a secret note that had been burnt in that episode. Most likely, there is more than one place where the record of what has been done is available to very gifted people. The second thing, I was walking back from the park one day, and I passed a woman who had quite a strong cologne. And moving past her, I could continue to pick it up like a trail. For maybe 30 meters, I could just sense it, and it reminded me of one of the practices of the Tibetans that Gurdjieff had mentioned it. And so, to the question, is the soul immortal? In general, it is only possible to answer yes and no. To answer more definitely, we must know what kind of soul is meant and what kind of immortality. As I have said, the second body of man is the soul in relation to the physical body, although in itself it is also divided into three principles. Taken as a whole, it represents the active force, the positive principle in relation to the passive negative principle, which is the physical body. The neutralizing principle between them is a special magnetism, which is not possessed by everyone, but without which it is impossible for the second body to master the first. Further development is possible. A man with two bodies can acquire new properties by the crystallization of new substances. A third body is then formed within the second, which is sometimes called the mental body. This third body will then be the active principle, the second the neutralizing, and the first, the physical body, the passive principle. But this is still not soul in the real meaning of the word. At the death of the physical body, the astral may also die and the mental body may remain alone. But although in a certain sense it is immortal, it too can die sooner or later. Only the fourth body completes all the development possible for man in the earthly conditions of his existence. It is immortal within the limits of the solar system. Real will belongs to this body. It is the real I, the soul of man, the master. It is the active principle in relation to the other three bodies taken together. Reincarnation is a very rare phenomenon. It is possible either over a very long period of time, or in the event of there being a man whose physical body is identical with that of the man who possessed these higher bodies. Moreover, the astral body can reincarnate only if it accidentally meets with such a physical body, but this can happen only unconsciously. The mental body is, however, able to choose. Gurdjieff's knowledge is absolutely off the scale. I hear from a certain category of fourth way teacher that this knowledge does not belong to Gurdjieff, which is a statement characteristic of a certain kind of person, and is also absolutely untrue. If the astral is created, then you have the astral and the physical, and there is a special magnetism between them, forming three layers. If the mental body also exists, then the three layers are simply the bodies. The level of development is different, but the principles are always there. The physical needs to be integrated first. That is the first job, before you even begin with this stuff. And then it requires special methods to create these three bodies. For anybody who's crazy enough to want to do this for whatever reason, I have learned to work directly with the three bodies from various Qigong practices. One by one by one. The fourth body is on a different scale. The fourth body appears to me to be much larger. And once again, you have to learn how to detect the qualities of it and to enter it properly. This requires great skill and long practice. Anyway, last week I was wondering once again why I had been so set upon by life and why my life has become so unbearably difficult. But the truth is, when I work inside and I see all the criminals lying inside my mind and all their nastiness and violence and dark shit that's in there, well, criminals come to me because I'm a criminal myself and we're like a gang of thieves. That's why my life is like that. I pull it towards me because there is a lot of bad shit inside of me. And it's not particularly innocent either, you know. Clearly, the material that I'm talking about is of no interest to the majority of humanity, and they're very happy doing their thing, you know, God be with them. The ideas that are passed to us, you know, as laymen's instructions, for instance, when you feel negative, then you should observe it. These are not very good instructions at all. They're superficial preludes and not the real work. Similarly, all of mankind is engaged in giving each other instructions. You should do this and you shouldn't do that. You can do this, yeah, for maybe 10 minutes. Afterwards, you're going to go back to what you normally do. It doesn't work. One widely held idea is that you observe something or witness and sit in the present moment. Yeah, for 10 minutes, and then afterwards you just go back to that rhythm that you normally do, and you'll just do the same old bullshit, because that rhythm is very deeply functioning. You can't change it without special methods. Yeah, and going back to Ted Nottingham, I read once that he had been in Florida reading Beelzebub's tales, and he was quite moved by Gurdjieff's books, and then immediately went to a cult in California where the predator Earl Burton, or whatever his name is, who lives in this fellowship of friends, was molesting all the young men who went there. Why not just go to the Gurdjieff Foundation in New York? Why race over to California to some exotic cult? Does it follow? And there are people who say, oh, I've studied the Gurdjieff work for 50 years, or I've been a Buddhist for 100 years. And? Does it mean that you know even the first thing? Gurdjieff said that the people of today are born in sleep and they die in sleep. It is normal for people to completely waste their life chasing charlatans. That is normal. I think I told the story. I was in Rishikesh, which is on the Ganges in India. It's this kind of spiritual center. And walking past one of the bookshops and cafes, there was a guy there. He was an old Indian guy who had this perfect moustache and perfect beard. and he looked like an old mendicant, and he had a little tin can, and he was begging, and that was his seat. Eventually I gave him a little bit of money, not too much, because I felt there was something not quite right about it. And as soon as I had put the money in the can, I suddenly had a shock, and I realized this is false. And that actually in India, cultivating this look of being a wise old man is an old dodge that they have cultivated there. And so it is with the Balerinas of the Fourth Way in their books. Another important thing that I realized this week is that the purpose of work, for instance, if you're doing some separation at the sink, is to enter the reconciling current. Nearly all work is like that, even if you're doing Tai Chi in the park. The purpose of it is to trigger the reconciling current inside of you so that you start coating. That is the purpose of nearly all work. Same with Catholic prayers, same thing. In going back to the idea of being a criminal in a gang of criminals, the fact is that this is where we live, this is what God has provided, this is what it is. You've got to make it work because there is nothing else. We live in a kind of matrix. The earth is a very bad place from the cosmic point of view. It is like the most remote part of northern Siberia, very far from everywhere. It is cold, life is very hard. Everything that in another place either comes by itself or is easily obtained is here acquired only by hard labor. Everything must be fought for, both in life and in the work. In life it still happens sometimes that a man gets a legacy and afterwards lives without doing anything. But such a thing does not happen in the work. All are equal and all are equally beggars. I would say that real study begins with the family, with looking after your family, your parents, even if it is difficult. And then to have faith in the traditions. There's no point beginning with some weirdo in California. Who would do that? There are traditions like Shivananda, Satyananda, Goenka, Soto Zen. It's a very good place to start. And you will see that, people are of different qualities. You've got to learn to stay with the people who have higher qualities. A big change happened to me one day when I realized that all real religion or spirituality is method. Catholicism is hopelessly old-fashioned, but they have methods. Like the rosary is a method, confession is a method. In Buddhism, the particular technicalities of each type of meditation is a method, plus they have communal things, they have pujas and different kinds of rhythms, walking, meditation. It's method. It's the same. It's always the method. The talking is always going to be impure, but the method is not. Well, I've got some delicious rose incense from Satya Sai Baba. Absolutely delicious. I was painting a large bookcase of shelves this morning, and I thought I'd put Osho on, so I listened to him for 2.5 hours. Much as I love his presence, everything he talks about is the usual New Age concepts. That we have been conditioned by this mean society that stopped us being ourselves, and that nobody can give you freedom or the path because ultimately you are you. Can somebody give you a calculator or a screwdriver because you are you? Conditioning and unconditioning is the way we learn. We learn by getting conditioned and then unconditioned, and then there's this struggle, and then we learn. And all this New Age stuff, which is technically incorrect, is simply the debris of a falling civilization. Because the Christians, for some reason, came to the end of their Christianity, and these European people started to cause a lot of trouble. They were once very religious people. The royal families of Europe were all seriously Christian, and they were also warriors. and also had lines back to ancient Roman Greece. This was a very deep and powerful culture, but it all just fell apart. The New Age ideas, if you actually trouble yourself to step back into the 1900, 1800, 1700 authorship, you recognize where it comes from. It didn't just begin in the 1900s. It is a chain of people collapsing. And they're trying to find some sort of way of understanding things that can replace the falling Christianity. And Gurdjieff is one of the only people who can explain exactly why. Okay, Ernest Miller Hemingway, born in 1899. But for the moment he finds himself in Paris. There were many ways of walking down to the river from the top of the Rue Cardinal Lemoine. The shortest one was straight down the street, but it was steep, and it brought you out after you hit the flat part, and crossed the busy traffic of the beginning of the Boulevard Saint-Germain, onto a dull part where there was a bleak, windy stretch of riverbank, with a Halle au Vin on your right. This was not like any other Paris market, but was a sort of bonded warehouse, where wine was stored against the payment of taxes and was as cheerless from the outside as a military depot or a prison camp. Across the branch of the Seine was the Ile Saint-Louis, with the narrow streets and the old tall beautiful houses, and you could go over there or you could turn left and walk along the quay, with the length of the Ile Saint-Louis and then Notre-Dame and Ile de la Cité opposite as you walked. In the bookstalls along the quay, you could sometimes find American books that had just been published for sale, very cheaply. The Tour d'Argent restaurant had a few rooms above the restaurant that they rented in those days, giving the people who lived there a discount in the restaurant, and if the people who lived there left any books behind, there was a bookstall not far along the quay where the cadette de chambre sold them. And you could buy them from the proprietress for a very few francs. She had no confidence in books written in English, paid almost nothing for them, and sold them for a small and quick profit. "Are they any good?" she asked me after we had become friends. "Sometimes one is." "How can anyone tell?" "I can tell when I read them." "But still it is a form of gambling, and how many people can read English?" "Save them for me and let me look them over." "No, I can't save them. You don't pass regularly, you stay away too long at a time. No one can tell if they are worthless. If they turn out to be worthless, I would never sell them." "How do you tell a valuable French book?" "First, there are the pictures. Then it is a question of the quality of the picture. Then it is the binding. If a book is good, the owner will have it bound properly. All books in English are bound, but bound badly. There is no way to judging them." After the bookstall near the Tour d'Argent, there were no others that sold American and English books until the Quai des Grands Augustins. There were several from there on to beyond the Quai Voltaire that sold books they bought from employees of the left bank hotels, and especially the Hotel Voltaire, which had a wealthier clientele than most. One day I asked another woman stallkeeper, who was a friend of mine, if the owners ever sold the books. "No," she said, "they are all thrown away. That is why one knows they have no value. Doubtless they must leave many on the tourist boats." "They do," I said. "The ferry line keeps them and binds them, and they become the ship's libraries." "Well, that's intelligent," she says. "At least they are properly bound then. Now a book like that would have value." I would walk along the quay when I had finished work, or when I was trying to think something out. It was easier to think if I was walking and doing something, or seeing people doing something that they understood. At the head of the Ile de la Cité, below the Pont Neuf, where there was a statue of Henri IV, the island ended in a point like the sharp bow of a ship, and there was a small park at the water's edge with fine chestnut trees, huge and spreading, and in the currents and backwaters that the Seine made flowing past, there were excellent places to fish. You went down a stairway to the park and watched the fishermen there, and under the great bridge. The good spots to fish changed with the height of the river, and the fishermen used long jointed cane poles, but fished with very fine leaders and light gear and quill floats, and expertly baited the pieces of water that they fished. They always caught some fish, and often they made excellent catches of the dace-like fish that were called goujon. They were delicious fried whole, and I could eat a plateful. They were plump and sweet-fleshed, with a finer flavour than fresh sardines even, and were not at all oily, and we ate them, bones and all. One of the best places to eat them was at an open-air restaurant built over the river, at Basse-Meudon, where we would go when we had money for a trip for our quarter. It was called La Pêche Miraculeuse, and had a splendid white wine that was a sort of muscadet. It was a place out of a Maupassant story. I knew several of the men who fished the fruitful parts of the Seine between the Ile Saint-Louis and the Place du Vert Galant, and sometimes, if the day was bright, I would buy a litre of wine and a piece of bread and some sausage and sit in the sun and read one of the books I had brought and watch the fishing. And it always made me happy that there were men fishing in the city itself, having sound, serious fishing and taking a few fritures home to their families. A few days later, the paper to which A was contributing contained an article on the road, in which A described the thoughts and impressions he had on the road from St. Petersburg to Moscow. A strange Oriental had travelled in the same carriage with him, who, among the bustling crowd of speculators who filled the carriage, had struck him by his extraordinary dignity and calm, exactly as though these people were for him like small flies upon whom he was looking from inaccessible heights. In the realm of Vaikuntha, the realm of Vishnu, all the planets are like the sun, and all the souls have a body like fire. Thank you for listening.